education, and let's kind of segue into like the market value. Like,
Mhm.
how are we determining market value? Because oftentimes you got students that if you've never, even like a lot of creators, you've never negotiated these type of deals. Now you're asking for money. How are they gauged and for them to understand what a fair price to ask is?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And this term fair market value has been thrown around in the NIL space since its inception. And it's kind of it's a bit it's a bit silly for me to hear this term fair market value because the market is so young and new that it is going to take, several more years, in my
Uh-huh.
opinion, for the market to really become established and for us to understand what is fair market value for a Division I quarterback at the Power Five levels NIL versus a Division III field hockey players name, image, and likeness. But the general guidelines that we can kind of follow as we're thinking about fair market value, at least on social media, is it's going to be really a function of how many followers do you have on a particular social media platform. So, kind of, what is your reach? How many people are actually going to see a piece of sponsored content that you put up there, and then secondly, what is that engagement that you usually get from your followers on social media? So, how many people are actually taking the time to stop, read the post, give it a like, provide a comment, maybe even click on an activation link that you have included in that post? And so you really kind of want to take a look at fair market value, at least from a social media perspective, in terms of followers and your reach, and then as well as engagement that you traditionally get from your followers on that post. And of course, as the number of followers that you have goes up, that's going to increase your NIL value. And then similarly, as the engagement rate that you get on your social media posts goes up, that's also going to increase your NIL value. So, if we were in kind of a perfect ideal world, we would be able to say that someone's social media NIL value is purely a function of their reach and their engagement. But of course, we know that there are a lot of other external factors that are playing into one's NIL value that maybe aren't necessarily representative of fair market value, such as some of the things that we're seeing with NIL collectives that are paying people what many would consider, paying recruits, I should say, what
Right.
many consider above their fair market value, because it is not just necessarily a function of promoting a product. It's also a function of, I want to get this player on my team to help that specific team win more games and compete for championships.
Right. And we talk about the social media piece, and I know this one is a huge piece. Have
Mhm.
you ever seen someone, the fact that that is a huge piece, you ever seen someone get a NIL deal without even being on social media?
Yeah, certainly. And
Really?
and as we talk about the ability to monetize your name, image, and likeness, again, there are certainly other avenues outside of social media, paid advertisements, social media sponsored content. Now, it is going to be a little bit more difficult because that social media profile, first of all, it's a way to reach large audiences. Secondly, it's a really key factor in today's society and in the marketing mix in terms of how to connect, especially with younger demographics. So you are probably going to limit your ability to really maximize your NIL value if you're completely absent from social media. But in terms of NIL monetization potential, again, writing books, hosting camps and clinics, even having.
Welcome to my NIL episode number 3, here to talk more NIL as we always do. My guest today, Adam Cocco, assistant professor from the University of Louisville or Louisville, depending on where you're from. I'm from Missouri. We say Louisville. So, Adam, thank you for joining me.
Absolutely, Colby. Thank you for having me. And yeah, it's kind of a Louisville kind of jumble it up a little bit as you say it.
For sure.
Mhm.
Nah, as we spoke many times, and when the space initially jumped up, reached out to you, and just talking about the different things that you were doing in the space. I know you're a professor at the university and teaching a class about different topics. Monetization is one thing that, of course, this is what it's all about. This is how it came about initially, making money off their name, image, and likeness. I've seen many different things, and I was researching even before the call of ways that athletes have become creative. So let's talk about that. What are outside of the norm, which is mainly as any influencer, hey, here's a brand. Can you post on your social media about my product, about my company? Have you seen anything else outside of that as far as monetizing their name, image, and likeness?
Yeah, certainly. So when we talk about college athletes, especially monetizing their name, image, and likeness, there's kind of two main avenues that athletes take, and one of them is the one that you mentioned, kind of the more traditional. You're endorsing or sponsoring a third-party product or service, whether that's something done via a social media paid advertisement or more of a traditional media advertisement,
Right.
such as a television commercial or a billboard or something. But when we're talking about college athletes specifically monetizing their name, image, and likeness, it's been really interesting to see some of the ways that athletes have gone about promoting their own work product or service. And I think one of the main ways that we've seen athletes do that in terms of promoting their own work product or service. Hosting camps and clinics, college athletes, obviously at the elite level of their particular sport, able to offer camps and clinics for youth athletes and charge admissions fees for those camps or clinics and monetize their name, image, and likeness that way. Also have seen athletes been able to engage in personal appearances and autograph sessions, as well as some athletes that have been able to produce some sort of original content. So there is a track and field athlete from Duke, Emily Cole, for example, that has written a book about how she feels her body, the type of nutrition that she finds necessary in order to compete at an elite level in her sport. We've seen some athletes, record music and provide or produce music and monetize their name, image, likeness through that avenue. So yeah, a lot of different avenues for athletes to do it. I think another one that's been really interesting to see is some college athletes getting involved in the NFT game, so those kind of digital
Yeah.
trading cards, and being able to sell digital trading cards with their name, image, likeness on it, and create income streams for them through that avenue as well. So those are some of the more kind of unique ways that we've seen college athletes monetize their name, image, and likeness.
Right, and I noticed that that NFT one is something I was just researching too. Had no idea that was. I think one group, so they created something called the Players Lounge. I don't think they're the
Right.
University of Georgia, I believe, out here,
Mhm.
and they made a substantial amount of money on that. Are you? I know at the university, do you? In the university, only have so much say in what they can actually recommend. Is there any recommendation from the university level, or is it mainly up to what the athlete deems might be best for their situation as far as creating income?
Yeah, really great question. So there is kind of this gray area about how much involvement a university or an athletic department can have in terms of athletes monetizing their NIL. Kind of the general guidelines are that universities are able to provide educational seminars, some guidance in terms of brands that you might want to work with or might want to avoid, or it's different guidance in terms of contract negotiations. But athletic departments can't necessarily be directly facilitating NIL opportunities for their athletes. So in terms of what I've seen from athletic departments and universities across the country, I think a lot of it is about educating athletes about how to build their brand and build their own personal brand, and then the different avenues that they can follow to monetize that brand that they've built, and really just kind of providing education and guidance around that, versus this direct facilitation of, hey, I have this company that wants to offer you a contract and I'm going to help broker that deal for you, which seems to be a bit out of bounds when it comes to how most state NIL legislation as well as NCAA bylaws are written on that particular topic.
Yeah, and I noticed, excuse me, and I noticed that too. So from a university, do you ever get in contact with do you hear from the brands often? Like, what are brands asking for, or is that, or they? I know oftentimes since you have all these different platforms like Open Doors, all these different platforms you have in place, and I don't know which one that you have at the university, but or are they going straight to the whatever platform you have, and specifically at the university, going straight to a platform to just look at the athletes on these platforms and saying, I want to work with them?
Yeah. So more and more it is through platforms like Open Doors or Influencer or
Okay.
No Mogul, things like that. And here at the University of Louisville, Open Doors is that kind of NIL platform that is utilized. And More and more athletes are finding opportunities through those type of platforms. I think originally when NIL became a thing in college athletics as of July 1st, 2021, it was a lot more informal, direct DMs between a company and an athlete on Twitter or Instagram or whatever. And I think more of that has been driven to kind of these formal marketplaces that have been set up around NIL. A lot of the activity is in the social media space because it's easy activation. You can reach a large audience through social media, paid advertisements. But in terms of exactly what type of content is being posted, how often, how frequently that content is being posted, of course, that's going to be very variable depending on how much the company wants to get out of
Right.
this and the type of reach that they feel they can get through an athlete posting about come eat at this restaurant or use this sports drink because it helps me. It's going to be a lot of variability there in terms of what we're seeing in the actual structure of these NIL deals.
Right, and to your point, I read a stat somewhere, I forget where it came from, one of those different platforms that I think about 65% of all NIL deals were basically posting to social media, right? Posting to social media. And I spoke in the interview I did with Kevin at the soda brand. He mentioned how, that's the thing that they wanted someone to post to social media, but I reached out and tried to do an NIL deal, and this is where, it was interesting because I reached out I was using Open Doors to actually do something to test and kind of see how this process worked. And I think I gave a fair price to the individual I was working with, but they came back and wanted more, which led me to understand like how much education, and let's kind of segue into like the market value. Like how are we determining market value? Because oftentimes you got students that if you've never, even like a lot of creators, you've never negotiated these type of deals. Now you're asking for money. How are they gauged and for them to understand what a fair price to ask is?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And this term fair market value has been thrown around in the NIL space since its inception. And it's kind of it's a bit it's a bit silly for me to hear this term fair market value because the market is so young and new that it is going to take, several more years, in my
Uh-huh.
opinion, for the market to really become established and for us to understand what is fair market value for a Division I quarterback at the Power Five levels NIL versus a Division III field hockey player's name, image, and likeness. But the general guidelines that we can kind of follow as we're thinking about fair market value, at least on social media, is it's going to be really a function of how many followers do you have on a particular social media platform. So kind of what is your reach? How many people are actually going to see a piece of sponsored content that you put up there, and then secondly, what is that engagement that you usually get from your followers on social media? So how many people are actually taking the time to stop, read the post, give it a like, provide a comment, maybe even click on an activation link that you have included in that post. And so you really kind of want to take a look at fair market value, at least from a social media perspective, in terms of followers and your reach, and then as well as engagement that you traditionally get from your followers on that post. And of course, as the number of followers that you have goes up, that's going to increase your NIL value. And then similarly, as the engagement rate that you get on your social media posts goes up, that's also going to increase your NIL value. So, if we were in kind of a perfect ideal world, we would be able to say that someone's social media NIL value is purely a function of their reach and their engagement. But of course, we know that there are a lot of other external factors that are playing into one's NIL value that maybe aren't necessarily representative of fair market value, such as some of the things that we're seeing with NIL collectives that are paying people what many would consider, paying recruits, I should say, what
Right.
many consider above their fair market value, because it is not just necessarily a function of promoting a product. It's also a function of, I want to get this player on my team to help that specific team win more games and compete for championships.
Right. And we talk about the social media piece, and I know this one is a huge piece. Have you ever seen someone, the fact that that is a huge piece, you ever seen someone get an NIL deal without even being on social media?
Yeah, certainly. And
Really?
as we talk about the ability to monetize your name, image, and likeness, again, there are certainly other avenues outside of social media, paid advertisements, social media sponsored content. Now, it is going to be a little bit more difficult because that social media profile, first of all, it's a way to reach large audiences. Secondly, it's a really key factor in today's society and in the marketing mix in terms of how to connect, especially with younger demographics. So you are probably going to limit your ability to really maximize your NIL value if you're completely absent from social media. But in terms of, NIL monetization potential, again, writing books, hosting camps and clinics, even having, another company be able to promote your personal appearance or promote your autograph session at a particular location on social media are ways for athletes to do that, even if they might not have social media or just are not active on social media, not promoting their own content. So it happens, but again, it is something that you will likely not realize your maximum NIL value potential if you're not out there actively promoting your product or your appearances or whatever it might be on your social media accounts.
Right. It's kind of like it's kind of like trying to go get a job now and not being on LinkedIn. Seems like every job application, you feel that they want your LinkedIn URL, right?
Yeah, exactly. It kind of brings up questions like, well, why don't you have a LinkedIn profile? Why aren't you active
Yeah.
on here? And you think about it from a company's perspective, and of course, it's going to be better for them if you whatever NIL deal you've structured with them, that if you're able to reach audiences and have a good followership on a particular social media platform, that's only going to benefit the company because you're going to be able to tap into new demographics that they might not be able to tap into, or just reach larger audiences than you would if you are completely absent from social media.
Right. And to your point, I'm curious too. I'm going to go back to monetization because
Hmm.
that's fascinating for me. Um, and what's been, and I know you do, as from a university level, you do educational sessions.
Hmm.
Do you Are you actively teaching, for instance, um, okay, if you want to work with brand X, the outreach to how to get in contact with whomever at that brand, or are you just saying here's just general information as far as what you can do and cannot do? Like how specific and granular are we getting when we say monetization and okay, the outreach aspect of that? Okay, go work with this, reach out to the marketing department. Is my question making sense?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I don't necessarily get into specifically, how to write a outreach message, or although
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's something that I should add in to my curriculum because I think that would be really good. But I definitely do talk about the necessity to go out and make it happen. Because unless you are one of those kind of, we'll call it top 1% of college athletes out there, and there's brands that are just kind of reaching out to you left and right, if you're one of those other 99% of athletes that maybe don't have that level of popularity, deals are not just going to come to you. It really is about you reaching out and making those connections. And I tell students and tell athletes all the time that if you're using a particular product and you really like it, whether some food that you like, or if you're a baseball
Right.
player, some
Yes.
type of batting gloves they use, whatever it might be, reach out to that company and say, hey, I'm a college athlete. I use your product. I really enjoy it. Is there a chance that we could strike up some type of endorsement deal here? The worst thing that they're going to say is no, or maybe just never reach back out to you. But there have been a lot of examples of athletes that have been able to secure multiple NIL deals because they take that proactive outreach strategy. I know one big one is Raekwon Smith, a
Yes.
wide receiver at Norfolk State University, Division III school. Is not a high profile football program by any means, but he has kind of dubbed himself the king of NIL, and
Mhm.
has secured, I think, more than 60 NIL deals at this point. And so much of that was because initially he was just every single day out there on Twitter and Instagram DMing companies. I like your product. I enjoy your product. I use it. I am a college athlete here at Norfolk State. Could we strike up some type of endorsement deal? And he probably got rejected dozens and dozens of times. But then one company said yes, and then two companies said yes, and then a dozen companies said yes, and then
Mhm.
20 companies said yes. And so, it really does show that there is the potential to really be proactive and maximize your NIL potential as a college athlete, even if you are not one of those kind of top 1% Division I, Power 5, prime time, football or men's or women's basketball players.
Yeah, I was going there too. I'm glad you brought up.
That's
I'm glad you brought up Ray County, king of NIL. He's actually
yeah,
just recently connected with him on LinkedIn. Want to bring him on and talk to him as well in regards to that. And
excellent.
yeah, I think that's one thing. The more and more I see this, we all got excited like NIL deals, like they're just going to fall out of the sky, right? Just because it's now available, but it still takes the work aspect of it.
Mhm.
Knowing your value. One of the things I will say this, and this is helpful. When I spoken to the one to Kevin, that the CMO at the last company interview that I did, he mentioned in regards to when people email him, make sure when you email him, it's concise, you're showing
Yeah,
your value, what you can add. And literally, if whatever platform you're using, if it's Twitter, if it's Instagram, just say, okay, here's my Twitter, I have this much reach on this platform, right? So you're just giving little nuggets. He said you should be able to read it in like, 2 to 3 minutes and get an understanding
mhm.
of, okay, what this student is all about,
Yeah,
right? So,
absolutely, for sure. And I think the other thing that's exactly correct and really good information. And the other thing I would add on to that is be cognizant of the company that you're talking to and the platform that you're pitching for a potential social media paid endorsement. So if you're talking to a insurance company, financial services company, probably something that's going to be more kind of a professional brand or something like that. You probably don't want to pitch them, hey, I have all these fun TikTok dances or something, because the
right.
audience that you have there is not necessarily going to resonate with that type of product. Versus something that's more of kind of a younger, hipper type product that maybe would be appropriate for a TikTok or an Instagram type of paid advertisement. So know that social media platforms have different types of followers, different types of demographics that might be following you on those platforms, and be cognizant of how that particular social media platform and the followers you have on that could represent a potential brand partnership well, or maybe wouldn't be a good fit for a brand partnership. So it's not a one size fit all strategy here.
Right. And I know you mentioned Wise Analytics that piggybacks on analytics, which is knowing your audience, knowing your breakdown, knowing your demographic. Is that do y'all teach that in the sense of, okay, use this software, here's an audit, how to audit my audience to be able to deliver that information?
Yeah, certainly. And honestly, a lot of this information is just readily available via some of the backend analytics on these social media
Okay.
platforms. So anyone can find on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. You can go into your backend analytics and see, okay, for each of my posts that I made, what do my engagement rate looks like? What are my, number of impressions on those posts? How does that compare to posts from last month or last year? Do I see a growth in the engagement and impressions that are going on there? What are the times of day or the days of week maybe that are
Right.
most frequent for people to see my posts or to engage on them? So there's a lot of really good information there. I also think that there is kind of at least a geographic breakdown in terms of where people are following you from, and maybe the people that engage with your posts, where they're located at. So there's a whole lot of just kind of free information available for you in the back end analytics portion of the social media platforms that you can use to help demonstrate, value, and really show that you care about when you reach out to partner with a company, that you have an understanding that, hey, I can drive good traffic at these times of day on these days of weeks from these geographic locations, and that is going to, that could align with a particular branding strategy that you have going on for your product.
Right. This is the same thing I used to do even pre-social media, right? You used to go to a certain
Mhm.
place when I did door-to-door sales. I know I probably look like I'm, like a young person, but I'm actually an old person, right? So I was out there doing door-to-door sales, but in the
Mhm.
same way, I used to go to a specific area, knew what area and what regions I was going to. It's the same thing
Mhm.
digitally now, right? So students, you have to understand, like athletes have to understand that, okay, if I'm going to again, if you have a company that's only local, right? You have a local company, it makes sense that they might want to do business with student athletes that might be local or might be
Yep.
within that area. They don't have any reach as a company in California. Why would they do business with anyone in California? So it's being able to zero in on that and say, okay, I have a strong following within this area, as a local business, I should start there.
It's a great point, Colby. And yeah, if you're looking to partner with a local restaurant, for example, that they only have this particular restaurant in the city of Louisville, there is no reason why that particular restaurant would care if people from the state of California are seeing your social media posts. But if you can show that, hey, I drive a lot of traffic from the city of Louisville, especially, and, whatever it is, 75% of the engagement that I get on my social media posts are coming from people within this, 10, 15, 20-mile geographic radius around the city. That speaks volumes in terms of selling yourself and selling your value to this particular brand.
Right, and it doesn't have to have like and this brings up the point too, because even when I started looking at this space initially, I was like, man, it's only the power five, those that have so high social media followings. But as you saw the student, it's just been the gentleman that I forget his name. I know him as the Popeye kid because he had the meme going around. He had that one.
That's exactly how I refer to him as well. I can never remember his name, but yes, yeah.
But that young man, he was able to get a deal, and he just DM'd a lot of companies, and Popeyes reached out. But it just goes back. He doesn't have a huge following, but he had that. He had that. But just imagine going to all of these local restaurants, whatever. You have 1,500 followers, and just making the same pitch of what you could do. That
Never.
adds up pretty quickly, right?
Doesn't.
So you don't have to have a huge following, is what I'm saying, to actually go out and secure a deal. And so I think more education on the aspect of outreach,
Yeah.
connecting, how to use what you have to actually secure a deal is kind of what I'm focusing on. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All great points.
Yeah. So Adam, it's been a pleasure talking to you about everything. Is there anything, I know parents, student athletes or this is still maturing. So still a lot that we're learning. Seem like there's a new rule every single day. Can't
Uh,
do this, can't do that. I guess the thing that you've experienced the most as a professor, and what is there one question that comes up more often than not? Just one question that you hear often about this.
Yeah, I don't think that there is necessarily one question, but there's one kind of general question, one not one specific question, but one general question. The general question is mainly, can I do this? And I think that is a result of
Mm-hmm.
there is so many different, depending on which state you're in, you might be under one certain state NIL legislation. Covered by that state's NIL legislation versus if you're in another state. So you have to worry about, the state that you're in, and do they have a law? What does that law say? Then, what is the NCAA saying about this, or the NAIA if you're at that level? And then what is your institutional NIL
Hmm.
policy? And as you mentioned, these are things that are not only disparate across the country, but also seemingly constantly in flux as the state of Florida, for example, just today amended their NIL
Hmm.
legislation. I know here at the University of Louisville, we've had several different changes to our NIL policy as people have learned more and as this topic has evolved over the course of the last 18 or 20 months or something like that. So just, can I do this is a really big question that is asked a lot. And, my response to that normally is, well, certainly we can sit down and take a look at, what does, in our case, the Kentucky State bill say about this, or what does U of L's NIL policy say? But also it's important to note that, this is one of those areas where an athletic department can be really, really beneficial because they are allowed to kind of help you interpret what is legal and what is not legal in terms of institutional policy or in terms of state legislation. So be in contact with the compliance department, or if your school has an NIL department, be in contact with them and just, this is not a situation necessarily where you want to ask for forgiveness rather than ask for permission. This is very much an opposite situation where you want to ask for permission rather than ask for forgiveness. So be open and honest about it, and communicate with people, and just receive that education. And whether it's education about state laws, about institutional policies, or it's education about how to build your brand, or how do I file for taxes when I'm getting all of these 1099s at the end of the year because I've been an independent contractor for 4 or 5 companies via these paid sponsorships or endorsement deals over the year. Just ask people for help with this stuff, and athletic departments, educators at your institution. That is, I think, a couple of really good resources for student athletes to tap into as they're trying to navigate these waters. So, understand from an athlete's perspective that you are in an educational environment, and there are a lot of people at an institution that have the skill sets to be able to help you navigate these waters correctly.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a perfect way to end.
Yeah.
in regards to it's kind of these different levels, these filters you have to filter through. Have a deal. Okay, does it meet the state level? Okay, does it meet
Mm,
the institutional level?
mhm.
You have to run it through these different filters. And it just always brings me up to my point when I'm making content. I always have to make sure. Eventually, I'll put up the disclaimer. Make sure you're checking with your state and local level before you apply any of this information. So make sure I'm covered
Absolutely.
as
Hmm.
well. Well, Adam, I appreciate your time. This has been helpful. This has been great. I appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Colby. Great to be here.
All right, you take care.
You too.